good morning, good afternoon, a special good evening, even those where you're from. A big warm Oceania greetings from us at the Micronesian Center for Sustainable Transport. Good evening to all of you, the participants, and to our esteemed panelists for joining across the world. My name is John Tuavake. I go by JJ. You can call me John or JJ or whichever whichever suffices. And I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Our webinar is titled Exploring Maritime Technologies for the Pacific and Existing Solutions and Future Pathways. And so at the outset, on behalf of our MCST team, I wanted to convey my sincere appreciation and acknowledgement to each and every one of you, including our panelists and our MCST team who made the time from your busy schedules, all of you to be part of this webinar, our second webinar for 2026, man. That's awesome. In our last webinar that we had, I think a few months back, we looked at the options for the Pacific at the international level, at the International Maritime Organization, in keeping an international decarbonization transition alive. And so our IMO work is very top-down. You know, how do we progress a global measure to decarbonize one of the hardest to abate sectors, large-scale shipping? And so this time around, we flipped the coin to look at the other side or the other end of the scale, the options for our domestic transition. And so the Pacific has been very clear all the way throughout in the last decade or so at the negotiations at the IMO that a long-term transition is only going to be really sustainable if it's equitable and it leaves no state behind. And that's what we all agreed to at the 2023 strategy. And so we've done a lot of work at the international level on what the technology solutions are for big shipping. And even without a mandatory economic measure at the IMO, we're seeing technology advances at the same speed and scale. So new ship designs, new engines, new fuels, new energy sources. And so we haven't done enough work to see what these advances mean or the options that we have here in the Pacific. So what technology should we be researching and assessing for deployment? What technologies, where do we get them from? Where do we get these technologies from? How much will they cost? And how do we train our seafarers to use them, capacity building? And so just in a moment, I'm going to pass on to MCST's Natasha Chan to give us a bit of context for the Talanoa that we're going to have with our panelists. And when she's run through her presentation, we're going to ask our two experts, my good friends and colleagues, Andrew Dickson, the transport lead for the Smart Energy Council based in Australia, and Rafael Held, who is GIZ's project director for the Low Carbon Sea Transport Project in the Marshall Islands, to share their reflections. And so welcome, gentlemen. Welcome, Natasha. Welcome each and every one of you to our Talanoa. We're extremely, extremely grateful for all of you and also to our esteemed panelists for your time here today. And with that, Natasha, I hand it over to you. The space is yours.
Thanks, John, Yakwe, Nisambula, and thank you all for being here today. And a very big welcome to my fellow panelists, Rafael and Andrew. This is a big and complex subject, but I'm going to try and keep it short and high level. What are the technologies needed to deliver an equitable transition at Pacific Island scale? This is a question our center has been researching for over a decade. Before we can answer it, first we need to understand the Pacific domestic maritime scenario. There is a lot to unpack, and for any of those who are wanting to dive deeper, our website and reference library is full of useful research material. Our domestic shipping scenario in the Pacific is not a healthy one. As maritime atoll, island, and archipelagic nations, shipping is for us as railways, canals, and freeways are for developed countries. It is our absolute lifeline. We are entirely reliant on shipping for almost all our energy, most of our food, and most manufactured products. Our domestic shipping is the only way of maintaining connectivity in island nations with EEZs measured in millions of square miles. We have the world's highest maritime connectivity prices, the longest routes. Think of miles, hundreds of miles in between atolls and islands, old fleets, and the narrowest economies, micro communities with minimal trading capacity. We will be the most impacted by the current fuel crisis. We always are. We are the most fossil fuel imported dependent region in the world. We are the most vulnerable region to climate change. Our domestic shipping services are often inadequate and substandard, except on the most profitable routes. Dozens of development reports going back decades highlight the shipping crisis for most of our countries, and especially for our most remote, poorest, and vulnerable communities. The unfortunate reality for our unique maritime geographies is that while shipping is an essential social need and first responder in times of crisis, it simply doesn't have a workable business case. We are trapped in a vicious cycle where no investment and insurance capacity means we are reliant on either old, imported, end of life, or donated aid vessels, highly limited maintenance capacity, and a rundown and undervalued labor force, requiring increasing state subsidization for basic services connectivity. It's not a new problem. SCAP well captured it in this flow diagram more than a decade ago. It is as true today. For a whole range of systematic reasons, low carbon shipping has simply failed to be recognized as an immediate priority in our region's development and climate response agenda. Too often, we continue to equate our needed energy transition only with renewable electricity generation. Almost all the limited funding that has come to researching shipping thus far has been generated out of our small government-owned center in the Marshall Islands. This situation doesn't make sense, and our research, backed up by a network of national and international experts, is clear that if we can understand the unique nature of our problem and apply the appropriate development and climate financing modalities, fuel savings of at least 40% are available to us today with existing mature technologies. There is an ever-expanding ocean of technology solutions available to the global fleet. An international revolution is now well underway. In last week alone, China has unveiled its first hydrogen-powered container ship. France announced a €62 million call for projects to accelerate the phase-out of fossil fuels. Norway announced it completed the largest maritime hydrogen conversion program ever attempted, placing hydrogen fuel cells on 6,000 fishing vessels. Things have slowed in the last year as the market reacts to the US and petrostates sabotaging the IMO negotiations, but the array of new technologies is unprecedented. New fuels, new energies, new engines, new ship designs, new technology are increasingly available for most vessels and routes at large ship scale, and more is coming. What is not happening is the investment in research and development at our scale of vessels. Again, the unique makeup and constraints of our domestic scenario means that only some of these evolving technologies are applicable for us today in the Pacific. It's not a case of simply taking international market leaders and scaling them down to our micro size. MCST has been tracking a wide range of potential technologies and asking which are likely appropriate for Pacific Island deployment. Some of these are shovel-ready now. All research over the past decade or more shows that wind assist is an obvious first mover. More on that in a moment. Others are in varying stages of technical readiness. Some could be absolute game changers if they can be successfully deployed. These include wing-in-ground ships capable of island hopping without the need for runways and fast-foiling ferries at varying scales. However, there are still technical, regulatory, and capacity challenges to be overcome before we can move to Pacific trials or deployments. And others are reliant on other sectors in our countries, making major advances before we can apply them at any scale. Electricity is the obvious example. While e-mobility solutions are making huge advances in Norway, Denmark, and Australia, our countries are still heavily reliant on diesel electricity generation. Large parts of our population just don't have adequate electricity for essential services. There is no surplus for maritime application, so deployment of many electricity solutions must wait until the sector catches up and delivers a clean surplus. Wind assist was the solution the Pacific arrived at in the 1980s oil crisis. Trials of retrofits and new builds were successful then, with 30% savings proven in pilots. It ticked a lot of Pacific boxes: low tech, adaptable, serviceable, with advances in both modern design and materials that we have even more options available now. New build wind assist rigs in hybrid designs with other efficiency measures are capable of achieving well more than 50% savings against comparable fossil fuel ships. Today, we have the Juranai, our first operational Pacific proof of concept prototype. We have a growing portfolio of designs ready, and we are following closely the market leaders, notably in France, that continue to advance proof of concept vessels. Some like the Neoline Roro, Windcoop's container ship, and the TOWT freighter. They're still too large for our needs here in the Pacific, but they set exciting precedents demonstrating what is possible. Our research has identified a range of vessel sizes and types common across most Pacific countries. This slide shows some existing examples of wind assist vessels and designs that could be suitable for Pacific routes. Some vessel designs are available now, and the ships could be built tomorrow if the funding was there. Others are in development, and others require further research and development to convert to Pacific appropriate vessels. Our advice to the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership is that the next transition step is to build, design, deploy, and operate a demonstration fleet of representative vessels on a range of routes across several countries. Our private shipping sector is thin, already heavily stretched, and undercapitalized. None are going to invest in new technologies and vessels without real-time proof of concept in full Pacific Island trials. Low-carbon shipping is a fast-developing field. There are multiple technologies that need to be tracked and assessed for their appropriateness. More uncoordinated pilot projects simply won't move us at anywhere near the speed and scale necessary. Structured and well-resourced theory of change is required. This graphic captures the one we have been developing for the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership. With adequate appropriate investment, the initial RMI and Fiji NDC targets are achievable with available policy, operational, and technology measures. Moving past this, achieving full decarbonization will ultimately require access to alternative fuels and technologies not yet at market. Ongoing investment in research and development will be essential. There isn't time to unpack this further, but the link to our research behind this theory of change is on screen, and we welcome comments and Talanoa. On a last point, John, before I hand it back to you, the transition to low carbon comes on top of the already significant challenges facing in this sector. The orange arrow at the top references 4 key foundational measures we have identified as prerequisites to a successful technology transition. The transition requires informed and empowered people, long-term investment in education, training, and research across the sector. So think of seafarers, operators, policymakers, regulators. That's the first step. We must be able to maintain the technology. At the moment, we don't have even working slipways in most countries. The technology will only be efficient if we can maintain and operate it effectively. Access to maritime data and the capacity to maintain it and analyze it is critical and currently almost non-existent. We won't know if we are being successful in our transition if we can't measure it. And finally, we need to seriously strengthen the institutional capacity of our small teams of overworked and under-resourced maritime regulators and policymakers. John, back to you.
Let's go. Thanks so much, Natasha, for that, for sharing your presentation. Yeah, guys, there's a lot to unpack here. And fortunately, Natasha and I are joined today by two experts who have been looking at this issue closely. And so now I wanted to acknowledge Andrew and Rafael. Andrew is a director of the Smart Energy Council, Australia's peak body for renewable energy. He's been a renewable energy project developer for 22 years, developing large wind and solar projects, including 10 years developing renewable hydrogen export projects. Andrew grew up sailing and spent 10 years in the Australian Navy and has affinity with the oceans and the wind. That interest has led him to undertake a Churchill Fellowship in 2025 to learn about wind-assisted ship propulsion, which took him to Europe and the Marshall Islands for 7 weeks last June to July. And we also have Rafael Held. Rafael is from Germany, where he studied marine operational engineering at the University of Flensburg. Earlier in his career, he chose to focus on sustainable shipping and sought opportunities in the Pacific, where he connected with the International Windship Association. Shout out to my brother Gavin, which brought him into contact with Dr. Peter Natal. Shout out to brother Pete as well. And Professor Michael Vass. Shout out to Professor Michael Vass as well. He then had the opportunity to join Captain Aviatar Ben Reshef, I hope I got that right. Ben, apologies if I got it wrong. On the SV Kwai, sailing from Hawaii to the Cook Islands and Kiribati. The Kwai, as many of you know, is a retrofitted sail cargo vessel servicing the line and the Northern Cook Islands. And at that time, we knew that sail was saving fuels and emissions. We had very limited ability to quantify those savings. And so in 2017, Rafael joined the initiative of the Republic of the Marshall Islands as an intern, and over the past decade, he's remained closely involved in its development. Today, Rafael is GIZ's project director for the Low Carbon Sea Transport Project, which is delivered, as we all saw in Natasha's presentation, delivered the jury and I our first new built wind assisted vessel in the Pacific. Yagwe, Rafael, and Andrew. And now I hand it over to you, Andrew, for some reflections on Natasha's presentation.
Thank you very much, John. Hi, everyone. As John mentioned, I've spent a lot of my life developing on grid-connected wind and solar projects. But the last sort of 10 years, again, I've been developing projects that aim to produce renewable hydrogen and ammonia. And I sort of I realized through that work that these fuels are going to be super expensive. So, in theory, they could help decarbonize shipping, but it's going to take a long time before it's viable. So I started looking for solutions that can scale sooner. And very quickly, I discovered wind-assisted ship propulsion. So I did a Churchill Fellowship last year. So I did a wind-assisted ship propulsion Churchill Fellowship, sort of traveled the world to understand the state of play. And I'll give you a quick glimpse at what I sort of learnt and what I saw. So there's a bunch of different wind-assisted ship propulsion technologies, and I'll just give you a kind of a visual look at the different types of them. So there's various soft sails, rigid sails, rotors, and sort of even newer sails like solid sails, but I'll just show you visually what I mean. So these sails look pretty similar to what you may be used to for sort of recreational sails. They're soft sails, it's pretty low tech, and it can be used for recreational sailing, but can also be used for cargo. So this is one example of a company from France that delivers palletized cargo, uses onboard cranes. It needs very little infrastructure on port. Obviously, it's a fairly large vessel in a Pacific sense, but this is trading across the Atlantic already. And yeah, I think we'll see a lot more ships like this in future. This, obviously, you're probably familiar with. On the right-hand side is the Durant Eye that Rafael will talk about. But this is a design from Germany a couple of decades ago, and it was used on the Greenpeace Rainbow Warrior on the left-hand side. So yeah, it's another type of fairly low-tech sail. At the other extreme, there's very high-tech sails. So on the left is a bulk cargo ship with rigid wing sails. On the left, it's from the UK called Bar Technologies. Each of those sails has a surface area larger than a wing of an Airbus A380. They're massive, really high thrust. These wings can fold down for for good loading and so on. But that's for really big ships. On the right-hand side is a vessel that takes Ariane space rockets from Europe down to French Guiana for launch, again with wind-assisted ship propulsion to reduce the need for fuel. This is a newer vessel. It's from another French company called Wincop. It's a small vessel that will take containers between France and Madagascar. So again, this is kind of getting to the scales that are almost viable in the Pacific, maybe still a little bit too big, but it just shows the direction of travel. Then there's suction sails, which again, they create lift in using sort of an aerofoil shape, but they have fans on top of the wings that sort of suck air up through the foil section, and that increases the amount of lift that these things can produce. And these are better suited to sort of small to medium ships. Then there's Flettner rotors. These were first demonstrated before the Second World War, actually, by Anton Flettner, a German engineer, and they're making a comeback. These are the most deployed wind-assisted ship propulsion technologies. Essentially, they're sort of big cylinders that rotate pretty quickly, sort of up to 100 RPM. And as the wind goes around this rotating cylinder, it creates lift. So they can be, again, deployed on all sorts of ships. On the left-hand side is again a bulk a bulk cargo ship, and on the right-hand side is a ferry up in the North Sea. Then there's sort of modern versions of sort of square rig ships. This is called Dynarig from North Sails. On the left, it's like a luxury sort of passenger yacht, and on the right-hand side is a proposed new ship service called Via. I think we'll see more of that in the future. Then there's solid sails. It's a pretty new design from France. Natasha mentioned Nearline on the left-hand side, which is a roll-on, roll-off vessel that takes cars and trucks and forklifts and boats across the Atlantic from Europe to North America. And on the right-hand side is the same rig, but deployed on a cruise ship that's just been commissioned in France. It's the Orient Express Corinthian. So again, this technology is permeating different sort of sectors of shipping. So you think, well, does this stuff actually work? And actually, yes, it does quite well. So the tout vessels, the first ones that I showed you, the soft sails, they can have an over 90% reduction in the grams of CO2 per tons kilometer of their shipping compared to regular container ships. Wind wings, again, each of those wind wings can save about 1.5 tons of fuel per wing per day, and sort of times it by 3 for CO2 savings. And Flettner rotors down the bottom save on average around 10% of fuel and emissions on a long-term global basis. So it doesn't do the whole job, but it's a really great place to start, and it does deliver meaningful fuel reductions and performance increases. So currently there are about 86 large ships that have been installed with this technology. A further 12 are sort of wind ready for installation. And really this year we should exceed 100 ships, and the number of ships installed with this technology roughly doubles each year. So again, the International Wind Ship Association has stats that you can see to follow the progress. So I and MCST see a lot of potential for this technology in the Pacific, but there's a number of issues. So we need really accurate data in the Pacific on shipping and fuel, and that will help to really quantify and sort of plan the rollout of this technology. Obviously, with domestic shipping, RMI has implemented the Juranai, which Rafael will talk more about. And again, it's the first sort of such vessel, But it's really demonstrating the potential of reductions in fuel and operating costs. So there's an opportunity to roll that out in more domestic fleets, so more in the Marshall Islands and more in other Pacific countries. And obviously, there's the proposal for funding to scale, a larger fleet, sort of 10 to 12 new vessels of different sizes and routes. And I think that's really, really worthy. Across the region, obviously, shipping is really expensive and it's reliant on conventional shipping fuels. There've been several attempts to sort of do this before, but the technology is getting a lot more viable. And not only for cargo shipping, but maybe even in future for wind-assisted cruise ships, as per the photo I showed you before. But it's not just about the ships, as Natasha mentioned, it's also about capacity and capability. So there's a critical shortage of maritime training in the Pacific, and that exists. So that impacts both existing shipping and it will impact future wind-assisted ships too. So, one of many opportunities I see is for the Australian Maritime College to deliver training to existing mariners and to future mariners. So it's not just about the kit, it's also about the capability. So yeah, that's a very quick whiz through, and I look forward to the discussion shortly.
Many thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.
Rafael, straight over to you, my friend.
Yeah, good morning and greetings from Germany. It's a pleasure seeing you all. Thank you very much to the MCST for the invitation for me, for GIZ to present here. And John, thanks for moderating. I can say the presentation as far has been very informative and has been already sharing lots of details about the work we've been doing. And I'm grateful. I just noticed that I could be involved in this topic for basically 10 years now. Exactly. I think I will start with sharing a little bit where I came from and how we started in the Marshall Islands. As you know, the German government has commissioned this project in the year 2016. 2017 was the official start. A few people from the auditorium have been well involved in developing this, I would say, very sophisticated proposal at that time, with a very innovative and holistic character, based on the very ambitious NDC commitment from the government of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, whom we work with very closely, in particular the Ministry of Transport. The NDCs of the Marshall Islands have involved the domestic shipping sector, as far as I know, as the first country in the entire Pacific region. The carbon reduction in the domestic shipping sector that we have approached in two different manners. The Marshall Islands, as a unique atoll nations, have transport needs within the vast lagoons of the atolls. At the same time, they have long ocean distances to cover and provide essential services to the neighboring islands out of the capital island, Majuro Atoll, distances up to, I would say, 1,000 nautical miles and similar on a domestic basis. For the inside lagoon component, we've been lucky to have worked with the NGO, who has installed new designs and is building those designs on island now. I think they are very much beloved by the people of the neighboring islands and now used in daily operations, which will help a lot. As you can imagine, fuel prices are extremely high on the open ocean shipping needs. We've been working with the Marshall Island Shipping Corporation, a state-owned enterprise in the Marshall Islands, who is responsible as per Act to provide essential shipping services to the people of the neighboring islands. And this is where the design of the Turin-I got developed with our project partners, above all the University of Applied Sciences Emden-Leer, based here in northern Germany, but as well with private ship design companies in Germany, but also internationally. I think the decision to design a ship such as the Turin-I has not always been clear, but it was a joint decision based on different parties involved in our project setup to go for a new design. And I would say from my perspective, we are glad we could do so, even with a very tight budget and different crises that came up in between. We've been able to build the ship in the Republic of Korea between 2022 and 2024. The ship was delivered in July 2024 to the government of the Marshall Islands and now is servicing since that domestically in the Marshall Islands as an international registered vessel, also classed under an Ajax class under the Korean register, and being able technically and legally to service also on an international basis. But as far the ship has only serviced nationally in the Marshall Islands and is still doing so, the ship is currently underway. And I think we are still learning. It's not that everything is perfect. I can be very honest about this. I think I do even consider this as a very important element of our innovative approach to deal with those problems, technical problems we could see, and improve the ship as we move ahead in order to make the best benefit out of this first prototype design for next trips coming up. We understand there is a strong commitment from the Pacific, basically, as it's all for the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership and future ships being designed for the specific needs of the different countries. As we understand, the Turan is fulfilling an entire package of different ideas and needs. The ship was designed as a combination of innovative and various propulsion means, including an electrical hybrid system, a solar unit feeding into the board grid, as well the Indosail rig, as it was shown also by you before, Andrew. Not the most sophisticated and modern rig, as we understand, used since maybe 40 years also on the Greenpeace Rainbow Warrior, but also other ships. But one of the elements that was really essential for us and our partners was to design a ship that can function in this extremely remote region with its very own constraints, and due to the remoteness, also the lack of spare parts and difficulties that come within the supply chain, and making it very essential for us to design a ship with industrial components, also allowing for a budget for such a vessel that can be afforded. I think this is a bit where I'm coming from. We're still observing the ship now servicing domestically. As I have said, we have reached a milestone. The Marshall Islands Shipping Corporation has reached this milestone with the partners' support to reclass the vessel for the next year. So the ship will remain in class, which is a really substantial milestone we've been working for since many months. And I'm really happy to be able to announce this here. And I think later on this year, there is also important political voyages coming up. The ship might go to the Pacific Island Forum in Palau to be presented also to other Pacific Island countries and interested parties. And I think this political meaning of the ship next to the transport meaning and purpose, of course, is one element that we always pursue from the political mandate we have. I think something what I really want to stress before I give it back to you, John, I think I do many times observe, and I'm not questioning this at all, I do observe a focus on the technicalities, and I think that's surely one of the most important elements. There is an abundance of opportunities out there since more than hundreds of years, as we all understand. Even the Flettner rotor is a very old idea from Magnus Flettner. But what I think, what I personally observe, it's not so much only about the design, it is basically about the system we build around it. Generally, the idea and the concept of the project I'm now responsible for with our partners to have quite a holistic approach. That's how I call it, tackling the different transport needs on the inside lagoon component, on the inter-atoll component, as well on the policy level. But this is more the work the MCST is doing regionally, but much more even internationally at the IMO level. I think at the national level, which we focus on, I think something I would say we observe is that it is really important to continue to focus on stabilizing the operation of the ship by, for example, an installed plant maintenance system, increasing the capacity of the crews and the shore management. This is, of course, an ongoing topic. the ship was designed as a training ship. There is also a training institute in the Marshall Islands now, and also this shall be continued and possibly extended, maybe even regionally. But I just want to reiterate this, that I think the vessel alone is a really important element, and that the elements you decide to put onto the ship, maybe even specific ones in different regions, I think this can be modified as you wish. But those elements alone, they will not make a functioning system. It is much more about the governance around it and everything that is involved. One last thing we have really noticed when we have commissioned the Churan was the amount of legal constraint we've been facing by designing and finishing and building a ship for a Pacific island country such as the Marshall Islands, is that it was just extremely difficult to have a vessel as such, not only internationally registered under a recognized class and a flag state, but as well getting the insurance prepared for an operator that is not so much known. And I think that's something where I would hope we could continue to work on to build up maybe a regional class. We have had discussions in a recent stakeholder workshop to establish such frameworks, possibly for a sub-region where we can now start from. We can't now work immediately throughout the entire region, but we're taking it step by step. And for us, the next logical step would to continue to work more in Micronesia. I think those topics are already quite practically discussed. There is a sail trial being discussed between the Marshall Islands and the state of Pohnpei in the neighboring country FSM in Micronesia. And I think that's my observation. I think it's really positive. The momentum is as big as I haven't observed it ever, but the work is not done. I think there must be a continuation of personal efforts of individuals as you are, and I think this is gonna be the game changer, a group of people who has a shared and common goal and a vision, and can continue to work on it throughout different cultures and continents. And I think that's the spirit, and I'm grateful I can present this here in the Talanoa. John, I give it back to you.
Wow, that was a lot of information, but thank you so much. Well, much needed as well. Thank you, Rafael, and thank you, Andrew. I had two questions though. First of all, yeah, thank you for all of that. Andrew, you had mentioned in your slides, and within the fellowship that you did, that you experienced all of these different types of wind propulsion, and we're looking at wind propulsion as one of the leading sources of energy for the Pacific. And so, with all of those different wind assisted propulsion systems that you had mentioned, what are the opportunities for those different wind energies to be applied into the Pacific, apart from the Juranai? And my question to you, Rafael, was, the Juranai as being this symbol of revival, in terms of economic capabilities, not only within the Marshall Islands, but within, the region, like in Micronesia as well. I was also fortunate as well to be in South Korea, in Goja Island, and again, Michael Voss was such a good host to me, where he showed me the building, the actual area when the Juranai was still in different parts and it was being constructed. And so, as the symbol that the Juranai has represented in, for the region as well, and gaining the support from the PBSP, are there other projects similar to what the Juranai, like for a decarbonized fleet that can move forward, not only for the Marshalls but for a fleet? Are there opportunities for that for other regions as well? And are you in talks with not only the Marshalls but with other countries about getting a fleet for them as well? And so I start with you, Andrew, and then I move to you, Rafael.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, there's many different types of shipping at many different scales.
Yep.
And not all technologies match all applications. So, one example is container ships. Container ships generally, obviously, that's more regional shipping. Container ships generally steam much faster than say, bulk cargo ships, or sort of just domestic sort of general cargo ships. And so they're not really suited for wind-assisted ship propulsion. Basically, the faster speed creates more apparent wind. It means that many of the technologies don't really work that well. Plus, they don't really have like a superstructure that's fixed because they stack containers up. So there's nowhere really to properly mount them. That is changing. New designs are emerging, but yeah, container ships, not so much. Obviously, several people mentioned, especially Rafael mentioned the need for the ability to maintain and service ships in a pretty remote environment, often where there's very limited sort of capacity to do that. So, it really needs to be simple. And so traditional sort of soft sails are much, much simpler and easier to repair and easier to operate than sort of the other extreme, those massive sort of rigid, solid wing sails that are sort of all computer controlled. So you've got to choose the appropriate technology for the appropriate scale. And so that luckily there's a whole smorgasbord of technologies that are proven. And these are not just sort of emerging. They're not low technical, readiness level. They're actually deployed and they've been used for hundreds or thousands of years. So it's not a simple answer, but basically choose the right technology. Generally, it's a low tech solution.
Yeah.
But that's the benefit of wind, because I've spent 10 years of my life developing new fuels, hydrogen and ammonia fuels.
Yeah.
In theory, great. In practice, not at all. It's going to take years, if ever, for that to be applicable for shipping in the Pacific. It's going to be super expensive. So, wind is the ultimate low-tech solution. It's available everywhere today. It's available at point of use. There's no complex supply chains needed. So start there.
And I think Gavin from IWSA would 100% agree with you on that.
Yeah.
As well.
Yep.
Well,
Yep. And again, it's not the complete solution. It's a hybrid. In the same way you have a hybrid car and that reduces your need for fuel, wind reduces the need for shipping fuel. So it's a really, really great place to start, because it can be hybridized, it can be retrofitted onto many existing ships, or it can be incorporated into new build ships like the Juranai.
Brother Rafael.
Yeah, John, you've been asking me about other regional fleets. If I recall correctly, what I briefly shared is that we do observe this interest beyond the Marshall Islands very seriously. There was different approaches just after the ship has been delivered 1.5 years ago from Solomon Islands, Fiji, Palau. I would say Kiribati was interested too. FSM, I think that's quite clear in the region. The interest is really there, and I would say the Marshall Islands have led the way and have paved the path, and I think they've shown with this very strong commitment and how it was successfully delivered that it's doable. And what is a bit more recent, I would say, is that we have received more requests from countries outside the Pacific region, particularly the Indian Ocean Commission was reaching out to us recently. Countries as the Madagascar, Mauritius, Seychelles, who also depend on maritime transport as a lifeline. They are really curious about learning from the Marshall Islands, learning from the Pacific. I think there's an opportunity to enhance the exchange as well. I have a few contacts in the meantime in the Caribbean region, also in Southeast Asia. I would say there's a lot of potential, but also I need to just highlight we quite a small project. It's basically a small team. Some of my colleagues are online here. We currently we are 4 staff in total, and it's sometimes even not so easy to facilitate all those needs. And I think it's really about communication, coordination, and facilitating those requests and disseminating the information. That's why I think formats as you have been choosing now since a while, I think are really needed and very helpful to bring out the knowledge and to be inspiring. I think it's really about sharing this inspiration from the leaders from the Marshall Islands and beyond to other regions, because they just not there yet. Partly that's what I would say, and I don't want to be rude, I just want to put it out there that there's a lot of potential, and I think it's going to be on us to continue to showcase the functionality of the ship.
Awesome stuff.
John,
Thanks,
can I just
Rafael. Go
jump
ahead,
in
yeah.
with one more point? So for me, the elephant in the room is energy security and fuel security. Obviously, at this time of energy crisis, that could get really ugly still. I mean, we're really at the early stages of something that could really turn terrible. So in Australia, 90% of our transport requirements onshore are imported. They're liquid fuels that we import. Pacific probably even higher than that. Obviously the price has gone through the roof in Australia. It's almost doubled. Diesel prices have doubled. And, when diesel supply runs out, then transport stops, Australia stops, and it's probably the same in the Pacific. So, shipping fuels, power generation, whenever you import, depend on imported fossil fuels, if that supply doubles in price or stops being delivered, that's a huge crisis. So the more you can capture your own energy, whether it's wind for domestic shipping, whether it's sun for solar PV, the more you can do that, the less you're dependent on these external shocks and events that you can't control. So, as per, wind with ships, solar PV, batteries, fuel cell, heat pumps, all of this technology is scaling. We've seen dramatic upticks in that around the world, and I think there's huge opportunities for the Pacific to scale this technology, to embrace it, and to need less imported fossil fuels. And this crisis has given us a really clear, laser-eyed focus on that issue. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. I had another question. Rafael, you also mentioned that the Juranai was a prototype, and we're currently at the phase of learning more about what the Juranai needs, what have been the good and the bad about what the Juranai has been doing. But I wanted you to share, what were some of the experiences or the obstacles that you had to overcome, in order to make sure that, the Juranai was viable for a place like the Marshall Islands. Like, for example, this project started in 2016, and, maybe was it time frames that you had to overcome? Was it capacity, in communication? What were some of the obstacles that you had to overcome in order to get the Juranai to where it was? And also, what are some of the findings that you've gotten from the Juranai so far? And Andrew, I wanted to ask, we've looked like basically, we've been looking at wind propulsion, and I also wanted to look. This webinar talks about exploring, different energy pathways, and so I wanted if you could explain a little the other types of energy pathways, for the Pacific, and why it cannot work. Like, for example, ammonia. There's also this electric, and there's also this talk about nuclear. And so if you could explain more about, about not only about wind, we've talked about that, and we've done a lot of telling about it, but how about the other energy pathways that, that could be for the region, that could work for the region, or, in the foreseeable future? Both of them. I'll start with you, Rafael, first. Sorry.
Yeah, John, thank you. I might just go back to the beginning of the project. From the design of this project, it was not clear that a ship would need to be built or would be built. There was many discussions on modifying the existing fleet. I could see it on one of the slides, Natasha, that there was one rendering of 500 GT Marshall Island government ship, the MV Ayman or MV Kwajalein, modified with flattener rotors or a simple sail system. I think that wasn't always clear, and we had to align those various project partners in something like a board and come to a shared understanding what needs to be done, what should be achieved. I think that was a bit of a communication effort that took a while, especially since the GIZ has not been working really in the Marshall Islands on the ground before. I think there was a lot of intercultural things that needed to be overcome, and I think could have been overcome. And eventually this decision was taken after consolidating a lot of information from going into the field, going on the ships, and also understanding what the demand is and what the prerequisites are, and then coming slowly up with something. What does the Marshall Island Shipping Corporation want, and what does the government want? And then the design was slowly developed. I think the bigger hurdles have been more related to procurement, which I would really not underestimate if you're working under such tight circumstances as we had to, as being a government organization. Spending tax money, and this also took quite a long time in the entire process that could not really be accelerated at the end of the day, even if I think about it now. And then there was the shipbuilding process, and even that was not minor, because on the one side we had a very committed ship design company in Korea and shipyard, but on the other side, some of the elements we and our partners and colleagues have been bringing to the table, they have not always been 100% clear, because it was an innovative combination of different propulsion means and so on. And I think this process needed to be integrated well, and I think that was maybe the biggest challenge, to bring all the different parties together and continue to drive a shared vision. And I would say this could be a bit more streamlined, but I don't think you can really avoid most of those steps. I would even say, if you're now discussing designing and building a ship for a different country in the Pacific, let's say for Fiji, you would need to start a bit from scratch again. The True and I will be a catalyst for this, but the homework still needs to be done depending on the different requirements from the different environments. That's how I would answer your question, John, if that makes sense.
Thanks so much, Rafael. Appreciate it.
In terms of the technologies, John. So again, in theory, there are many technologies that can work. It's like with onshore power generation. Yeah, you mentioned nuclear. So yeah, sure, you could generate power with nuclear if money is no object. It's super expensive, way more expensive than, say, wind and solar and conventional thermal generation. So, there are ships that run nuclear reactors, but they're Navy ships where cost is no object. So, forget about nuclear, really. Hydrogen and ammonia, sure. Fuel cells, yeah. Technically it works, but it's really expensive and it's not available yet. And it will be a long time before it is. And I'm speaking as a hydrogen guy. I've done 10 years of this. Yeah. So I think forget about that completely. Start with appropriate technologies at the right scales. Wind is the obvious place to start, but also electrification. So, there's an Australian shipbuilder called Incat Tasmania. They've just built the world's largest electric ship called the China Zarilla. It's a passenger and vehicle ferry for South America. That technology is now viable. People assume that batteries are for small things, but no, they can also be for very big things like big ships. There's a dramatic scale up of battery electric ships in China, battery electric trucks in China. Heavy transport can now be electrified. So that then leads to the need to feed the beast. What's going to power these future electric ships? And again, they can be small ships like interlagoon vessels. They can be electric. Sort of more regional ships, they can also be electric, but you need power generation to feed it. And so I think sort of wind-assisted ships in the domestic fleet in the Pacific is a great place to start. Small vessel electrification is a good place to start, but especially a dramatic transformation of power generation onshore. So, really displacing diesel generation as quickly as possible. And scaling up domestic renewables in the Pacific. That's, to me, it's a complete no-brainer. And it's very doable. In my home state of South Australia, next year will be 100% net renewables. We've gone from sort of 0 to 100 in just over 20 years. The technology to do that is readily available, readily scalable. There are smarts in how to do it. So again, we've kind of done this. There's a lot that we can share based on what we've done and others around the world have done. So start there. That's my advice.
Awesome. Guys, the chat is open. Please feel free to post your comments or your questions, or feel free to raise your hand. I wanted to now give some space for Natasha. And Natasha, I wanted to get you in on, like, it seems like at the IMO, we're always talking about ZNFs or zero, near zero fuels. And so, in your opinion, Natasha, what do you think are possible future fuels for the region? Could it be green hydrogen or green ammonia, or what do you picture?
Thanks, John, for that question. Yes, you're right. For Z and Z fuels, that is the big topic right now at IMO and for most big shipping. At some stage, we will need alternatives to diesel and premix here. We can get a long way with operational practices, better maintain, newer, cleaner, and more efficient ships. After all, the cheapest fuel is the fuel that you don't have to burn. And renewables, especially wind, but also in time electricity or electric drives, foils, and the like take us a long way down the track. But alternative fuels are very difficult for the Pacific. First, there is the price, just as Andrew had mentioned, and second, there is the technical capacity to use the fuels. But the real killer for the Pacific is the cost of bunkering. And in many parts of the Pacific, we're still filling from 200-liter drums, sometimes lighted by hand across the Pacific. So the cost of a safe and secure bunkering network for all our islands for hydrogen or methanol or ammonia would be astronomical. And methanol is probably the closest we have to a drop-in solution. But even so, there is a big and expensive technical issues to overcome. Ethanol or biofuels are possible, but previous attempts have not proved successful. The economies of scales that we have here in the Pacific. So the issue of our future fuels is, of course, tied to our overall energy futures. We're so reliant on imported fuels, fossil fuels, and we can hardly afford that. The choice of our future fuels is undoubtedly this generation of Pacific finance ministers will have to face. So, yeah.
Thanks, Natasha. And I mean, rightly so, you've raised some really good points. I wanted to give it to our audience now. Do we have any questions or comments for our panelists, for Andrew, Rafael, or Natasha? And I would give you space now, if there was any. Or everyone is just so gobsmacked about the amount of information that all of us have provided, and they're so amazed.
While people are thinking, I'm happy to jump in with another point.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Andrew. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, obviously one of the arguments against an energy transition is, what's it going to cost to install this new stuff and transition? But, obviously, again, the current energy crisis highlights that actually not transitioning has an even greater cost. I'll post a link in the chat where a UK climate committee, sort of an independent body, basically said the cost to the UK economy of a price event like we're all experiencing now is greater than the total cost of the economy is greater than the total cost of reaching net zero. So, again, we're dependent on these fossil fuels, which are amazing. I mean, fossil fuels are just energy storage in chemical form. They're amazing. You can, store them at ambient temperature and pressure, and there's high energy density, but they come from regions that are highly geopolitically gnarly. They can go dramatically up in price, and so we're dependent on something that's really risky, let alone climate change. So the cost to transition is more than worth it because it reduces our risk of events like we're experiencing now, as well as arresting climate change, which is existential for low-lying Pacific Islands.
Thanks, man. Thank you so much, Andrew, for that. Sorry, I was told, can you guys hear me properly now? Loud and clear, all good? And so I'm just going to ask for some final points, for you, Andrew, Rafael, and you too, Natasha. what's for you guys and your work that you're doing in your in your spaces? What's next? What's the next? What's next for 2026? Let's look at like short term. What's in store for 2026? Maybe in the next couple of years for you guys in your work. That'll be just some final thoughts before we finally close up.
I'm happy to jump in again.
Oh,
Sorry. Should I jump in?
Pete raised one. Just before we go to that final
Pete.
one, our friend Pete, thank you, Pete, for your question. He said, we said in 2014, after analyzing the lessons from the 1980 crisis, that it would never be cheaper than today. How do we convince our donors? How do we convince the donors? I'll leave that to you, Andrew or Rafael.
Yeah, I mean, that's the multi-billion-dollar question, really. But again, a lot of the arguments have been about sort of climate change, which is, absolutely legitimate. But fuel security, is existential. Well, they both are existential. One of them sooner than the other. So again, just vulnerability to these massive energy disruptions has enormous impacts everywhere. I mean, in Australia as much as in Pacific Islands. So in terms of what's next for me, so again, a lot of my life's work has been doing onshore renewable power generation,
right.
but now it's expanding into heavy transport in Australia. So 90% of our liquid fuels in Australia are imported, and all of our freight is all diesel. So again, when diesel stops, trucking stops, and then Australia starves. Basically, the economy stops and people starve, literally. So, but again, as I mentioned earlier, electrification is now viable for most trucking in Australia and, of course, in Pacific Islands as well. So let's dramatically scale up electrification of transport, both onshore and offshore, and then dramatically scale up renewable power generation. Because again, it breaks us free from this cycle of suffering when these events happen like we're going through now.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. Rafael.
Yeah, what's next on my side for the year 2026? As you might be aware, this project ends at the moment in August. We might be able to extend it until December, but what we've been working very closely with the ministry and the government of the Marshall Islands is basically another project extension with the donor. That's what we're currently discussing at a very early stage. I wish it could be a bit faster, but given the international situation, also in Europe, the pressure on the German government is as well quite high from my observation. So I do not exactly know how this low carbon sea transport project would be continued or move on, but we working for enhancing the sustainable shipping in the Pacific. And I can say this quite easily because I've seen it, as you mentioned earlier, by my involvement on the Quai just for a few months 10 years ago, that it is viable and not only needed, but also economically very viable. And it can be done if the right people come together. And I think that's what I have on my horizon. And most hopefully, we can work on it together on a national, regional, and international level. And I think that's the most compelling and attractive package I think that some region can offer. And I'm really quite positive about the developments. And what I observe, even last year, we've been lucky to be able to take a delegation from the Marshall Islands, including the Honorable Minister of Transport, His Excellency the Ambassador, who is also in the room here, Presidential Special Envoy to Germany. And I can really say that was very convincing, and the government is really convinced it is only a financial topic. It's not about the content. The content is clear and is well received. The project is, I think, jointly executed very well and has reached international recognition. It's about those financial constraints any other government might have too at the moment. We'll see, and we'll continue to work on it. And I do want to be hopeful about this.
Thanks so much, Rafael. How about you, Natasha?
Yeah, for the year 2026, I think the focus is on progressing work through the PBSP, I mentioned in the presentation, particularly on demonstrating vessels, strengthening foundation capacity and aligning policy and finance. Yeah, so we can move from the research into actually implementing these things in our Pacific waters.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll also be seeing you at the IMO in a couple of weeks' time as well. So looking forward to that as well. Wish us luck,
Looking forward.
Andrew and Rafael. Wish us luck. It's gonna be amazing. And so, guys, I really appreciate. We all knew we were gonna go a bit of island time and we'd go over the hour, but I really, really appreciate. Natasha, thank you so much for your presentation. Andrew and Rafael, thank you both so much for your sharing in this Talanoa. I learned a lot, but I'm also very happy that we have people in this, in the spaces like you're involved in, constantly pushing the work and pushing the voices of the Pacific at that global level. So I really, really thank you guys for your time and for your energy. I know, Rafael, you and I, it's about almost 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning for us. It's after 2 a.m. So I appreciate your time. Andrew, you're all the way in Australia. Thank you so much. Natasha, you're in Fiji. I hope the cyclone is not too bad where you are, but thank you guys for the time and the space. And yes, Pete, right, I was going right into that. We're going to end us off with a piece from brother Isao Ishoda, who's going to share a closing piece. And right after that closing piece, we will formally end our recording for today. And thank you guys so much again. I cannot stress how thankful I am to you guys. Ishoda, I give you the space. Komoltata. Komoltata. Komol Tata. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay in touch. More webinars coming up for the year 2026. Check us out on our socials, on our LinkedIn pages, on our YouTube pages, and our Facebook as well. Stay tuned for that. We got more Just an Equitable Transition episodes coming out as well, so stay tuned for that as well. We're active in this space and we are continuing. So guys, stay tuned for more information on that. But again, Rafael, Andrew, Natasha, Isao, thank you guys for holding this webinar with me. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. So again, Jet now, Jet tomorrow, and Jet for the future. Chee-hoo!